Top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. A back-and-forth exchange between two of the middleweight champions in the women's middleweight division, Claressa Shields, Savannah Marshall, the only two champions at that weight. Claressa says, I never think about Savannah Marshall, I only think about the best. To me, Savannah Marshall is not the best. Does Marshall deserve a fight with Claressa Shields? To which Savannah Marshall posted two emojis.
Shithouse.
As Savannah's interpretation of Claressa's comments is little more than just a bit of shithousery. To which Claressa Shields replied, you're a bum. You only fight last-minute replacements, and I can't wait to whoop her ass and smoke you next. Savannah Marshall responded by saying, your next opponent has declined a fight with me 3 times, yet accepted a fight with you. I wonder why. Pillow fists.
You have to give Savannah Marshall the edge and power.
I've never seen anyone, Claressa Shields included, put a beating on Hannah Rankin the way that Savannah Marshall put a beating on Hannah Rankin and stopped her.
Though before these two meet in the ring,
they are going to have separate respective bouts against other fighters. In the immediate future, we're going to see Claressa Shields make her Sky Sports boxer debut against unbeaten Slovenian contender Emma Kozin, who's going to be challenging Claressa for her 3 middleweight titles.
the 3 alphabet titles and the Ring Magazine belt.
And that's supposed to go down early next month on the undercard of Eubank versus Williams. Savannah Marshall, she'll be returning to action sometime afterwards against an opponent that has yet to be announced. Don't know who.
And as stated, you have to give Savannah Marshall the edge and power.
Claressa Shields gets the edge in speed and experience. Savannah Marshall gets the edge in height and reach and power.
Though power in and of itself means nothing if you can't land.
And I think that's what this fight is going to boil down to. I think Savannah Marshall actually has the kind of concussive power that could hurt Claressa Shields and potentially stop her, so long as Savannah can land, and that's just it. Landing clean on Claressa Shields is easier said than done. Her quick jab and fast counters.
They have a way of making girls gun-shy.
Making girls afraid to throw, shelling up, and just hanging on, trying to survive, trying to make it out of a round. I feel like this fight really hinges on whether or not Savannah Marshall lets her hands go, because so long as she's letting her hands go, she increases the likelihood of landing big.
Yeah, as long as she's letting her hands go.
Though before it comes to that, we're going to be seeing Claressa Shields in there with unbeaten Slovenian Emma Kozin. I don't think much of Emma Kozin.
Don't get me wrong, it's a good scalp for Claressa to collect.
Unbeaten fighter, there ain't too many of those floating around in today's middleweight division. Better still, Emma Kozin isn't in Claressa Shields' league, or Savannah Marshall's for that matter.
You know, I would have preferred to see Shields versus Miller.
Raquel Miller, who returned to action late last year off a lengthy stint of inactivity against Sonia Drilling, she
decisioned Sonia in a 6-rounder.
And before that Sonia Drilling fight late last year in December, Raquel Miller had been out of action a while. She hadn't had a fight since late 2019 against then unbeaten Alma Ibarra.
That's a victory that's aged well.
For my money, Shields versus Miller is a way better fight than Shields versus Kozin. It's more intriguing. There's actually bad blood between them. There's history there, and I would have liked to have seen that play out inside of the squared circle, under the hot lights. I would have preferred to see that than...
Raquel Miller's a better boxer than Emma Kozin.
To the eye, at least, she doesn't have as many pro bouts as Emma Kozin, but like Emma, she is an unbeaten fighter, sporting a professional record of 11 wins, no losses, no draws, 4 knockouts.
You have to wonder, where does Raquel Miller fit in today's middleweight picture?
Because we know she ain't fighting Claressa Shields. Will she end up fighting Savannah Marshall? Will she end up fighting the winner of Shields versus Marshall? You have to wonder, what does the future hold for a fighter like Raquel Miller?
We know what the future holds for Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall.
Those two are going to be boxing at least one more time before they square off against each other. Comes to Shields versus Kozin. The conservative prediction really is Shields on points because Shields just ain't the biggest puncher, and I think that's established by now. The conservative prediction, the safe choice, is Claressa Shields on points, though for Claressa's sake,
I hope she stops Emma Kozin.
I know that might be asking a lot because Claressa Shields hasn't proven to be a knockout puncher. Emma Kozin, Emma herself, she's never been stopped. She's never actually lost a fight, so asking for a knockout may be a tall order, but nothing endears a fighter to the fight fans than a nice highlight reel knockout, and I'm hoping that Claressa's got one of those in the bag. In other news, by way of the WBA, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now. The WBA posted this via their Twitter account. It reads, the World Boxing Association Championships Committee ordered the lightweight world title fight between champion Gervonta Davis, secondary champion Gervonta Davis, and mandatory challenger Rolando Romero sign up for KOs. This comes as a surprise to no one, me least of all, because I told you guys as soon as Rolly was cleared of those sexual misconduct charges that they're going to reschedule this fight. This is what they're going to look to do.
And that's what they're doing.
All that talk from Calvin Ford last week was hot air. All that talk about them looking to make a Vasilo-Lomachenko fight. I've told you guys time and time again, Gervonta Davis, in his career, exists in a parallel universe to the sport of boxing. Parallel to it, though not a part of it. Thus, he's not fighting for the same belts that a Vasilo-Lomachenko, a Devin Haney, a George Kambosos, these fighters. He's not fighting for the same belts or even for the same reasons these guys are fighting. He's not fighting for what they're fighting for, in spite of how often we see his name tacked on to theirs.
Because of the boxing scribes.
And some of the boxing fans, you might want to see a Gervonta Davis versus Devin Haney fight. You might want to see a Gervonta Davis.
You might want to see Davis versus Lomachenko or Davis versus Kambosos.
But how many times have I told you? None of that stuff is going to happen. None of those fights.
Zero.
You got Calvin Ford and all his quotes about a Vasilo-Lomachenko fight, but at the end of the day, this was always the fight they were going to have. This was always the way it was going to be. As soon as Rolly Romero was cleared of those sexual misconduct charges, what did I tell you?
This.
They're going to look to reschedule the Gervonta Davis fight. And in truth, I don't know that the Rolly Romero fight performs any better than the Isaac Cruz fight did. The draw in the Isaac Cruz fight, the draw as it were.
Draw's supposed to be Gervonta Davis.
Not the man opposite the ring of him. You think about Isaac Cruz and how Isaac didn't have much of a profile. Isaac, who was standing in for Rolly, but Rolly doesn't have much of a profile either.
Rolly Romero doesn't have a big following.
I think Davis versus Romero does comparable numbers to Davis versus Cruz because he's not fighting somebody that the fight fans are asking him to fight. It's a fight that has no buzz, no excitement. Nobody's asking for it.
And at a time where too many fights are ending up behind a paywall.
I would advise any of you guys out there to not get into very many arguments about Gervonta Davis and what is or isn't pay-per-view worthy, because in all likelihood, the guys that you're arguing with, the guys that are arguing in favor of Gervonta Davis, they're not buying his fights either.
So when his supporters and his critics got the same thing in common,
That neither of them plan on buying his fight, when both his fans and his critics don't plan on spending their hard-earned dollars to see him in action, what fucking difference does it make what he's doing? So long as he's not holding any major titles hostage.
let the fat fucker do what he wants.
It's a waste of time talking about a Gervonta Davis versus Vasilo-Lomachenko fight, or what would happen, what could happen in such a matchup, or a Devin Haney matchup, or even a George Kambosos Jr. matchup for that matter, because none of that stuff is going to happen. So what's the goddamn point? And what's the goddamn point in arguing about...
Why would you argue with these guys as to whether or not his fights are pay-per-view worthy when they're not paying for them?
If his own fans aren't buying his fights, you think his critics are going to buy them?
Ask any one of those fucks to show you a receipt. Any one of those schmucks to the last Gervonta Davis pay-per-view they bought.
Whenever you purchase a pay-per-view, you get sent a digital receipt to your email that is fairly easy to produce.
I guarantee you they won't show you a receipt because they ain't got one.
They're not about to buy Gervonta Davis's fights any sooner than you or I would. That being said, it comes as a surprise to no one that now Rolly Romero's been cleared of all those sexual misconduct charges. They're going to look to reschedule that fight behind the guise of a mandate, behind the guise of a fight that the WBA ordered for Gervonta Davis's secondary title, because he's not interested in being a full-fledged champion. He's happy with a lesser title, happy with a baby belt. So let him defend it if it means that much to him.
Who gives a shit?
In other news, boxing scribe Julian Julianis tweeted, as the borders of Japan are going to be closed until March, now the plan for Inoue's next fight is to do it in June. And the idea is to go against either Jonriel Casimero or Nonito Donaire. I think Casimero being in the running for that fight really all depends on how soon it takes them to reschedule the Paul Butler fight, because he's still under orders to take care of his mandatory challenger. We know he didn't get the chance to because he claimed he fell ill the week of the fight, was forced to produce documentation that verified some kind of an illness, and he's done that. He still has his WBO title, but he still has to fight that guy, and at this time, I know of no tentative date for what is supposed to be Casimero versus Butler. We know that a few days ago, there were some talks of a Inoue versus Donaire rematch. Talked about it here on the channel. And for Nonito Donaire, who's approaching 40, that's about the only fight to have. That's the only fight worth his time worth his effort.
It's the biggest fight he can have at bantamweight.
Nonito Donaire very recently expressed some interest in facing the winner of Chocolatito versus Estrada 3, but with that fight hanging in the balance, with that fight now being in jeopardy,
Apparently Juan Estrada isn't feeling too good.
he's not performing up to scratch in camp in preparation for the third installment of Chocolatito versus Estrada. Thus, that fight might end up getting pushed back, and the winner of that fight really isn't an option for Nonito at this time. And if I'm being honest, I don't want to see Nonito against the winner of that fight. I'd rather see Nonito against Inoue for a second time, or against the winner of Casemiro versus Butler, if I could have things my way. And I think that's the best option for Nonito Donaire. A rematch with Naoya Inoue, that likely pays him more money than a Casemiro fight would, I think.
This news about Japan's borders doesn't just affect Inoue versus Donaire.
It also affects the unification match that's supposed to go down at middleweight between Gennady Golovkin, who holds the IBF title, and Ryota Murata, who holds the WBA title. As you can imagine, this also affects their rescheduled fight that hasn't been rescheduled yet. Can we expect that fight to go down as far into 2022 as June?
These quasi-retired middleweight champions.
I'll tell you something, the middleweight division ain't the glamour weight that it used to be, and a large part of the reason is because Gennady Golovkin, he's been out for over a year, will have been out over a year by the time he does fight, and Ryota Murata, I think he hasn't fought in something like 2 years? Over 2 years?
This news about Japan's borders affects that fight as well.
Should we expect to see Gennady Golovkin versus Ryota Murata over the summer, in June or July? That's a lengthy stint of inactivity for an aging fighter, an aging champion like Gennady Golovkin, though the saving grace and the silver lining is that Murata's been out longer than him.
You know what's bad about all these interviews I see? I see certain interviews that quote what I said, and I think to myself, I ain't done no interviews. Where did this person get this information from? I'm hearing people saying AJ accepts 15 million to step aside. I ain't signed no contract. I ain't seen no contract. So as it stands, stop listening to the bullshit until it comes from me. I'm the man in control of my destiny. I'm the man that handles my business. I'm a smart individual, and I make calculated decisions every step of the way. Don't listen to the bullshit from other sources.
That is former unified heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua grabbing the bull by the horns and dispelling rumors that he's on the verge of accepting or has already accepted 15 million pounds, which translates into roughly $20 million in US dollars, to step aside and allow Tyson Fury to fight Oleksandr Usyk for what would be the undisputed heavyweight championship. Tyson Fury himself has been fanning that flame by way of social media, posting polls asking the fight fans if Anthony Joshua will step aside or will he fight Usyk for a second time, though Anthony Joshua himself...
Well, he's pretty much shut all of that down.
This story is coming to us by way of Gareth A. Davies. Gareth Davies, who's a big fan of Tyson Fury, and he's made no secret of that today's punditry and what passes for journalism these days.
What passes for punditry?
And how it is these news stories come to us, the boxing fans, how these stories get to me and you. It's not so much about it being accurate as it being fast. Fast enough to get the clicks, to get...
It's fucking clickbait is what it is.
That is what passes for news these days. In the in-between time, while we wait for big announcements to get made, when is Anthony Joshua going to be fighting Oleksandr Usyk? Because for all intents and purposes, that's what he seems to be in preparation for. He's made no secret that he's in the market for a new trainer, that there are going to be changes made to his corner, that he plans on becoming a 3-time heavyweight champion. Those are his own words.
And that doesn't sound like the stuff a guy who's about to step aside would say.
There are a number of big fights in the heavyweight division that are in a state of limbo right now. That in unison with the alphabet titles, WBC, the WBO, the WBA, and the IBF. When you think about it, we don't really know with any certainty what's going to happen when it comes to Fury versus White or Fury versus Ngannou, a crossover boxing versus MMA match that Fury seems to be entertaining. We don't know what's going to happen with Fury and White. We don't know what's going to happen with Fury versus Ngannou. We don't know when we can expect Joshua to fight Oleksandr Usyk for a second time. We don't know who his new corner is going to be. There are a lot of things that we don't know right now, and that is creating widespread speculation.
We don't know if Deontay Wilder's going to come back or if he's going to retire.
There's a lot of speculation when it comes to that as well. You'll notice that here on the channel, I didn't spend much time on these rumors that Anthony Joshua might actually take step-aside money to allow the undisputed heavyweight title fight to go on.
If he did, I wouldn't hold it against him because that's what we wanted Deontay Wilder to do not that long ago.
Even though Wilder had exercised his right to another fight with Tyson Fury, what I wanted to see that guy do was stand down, step aside, and let Tyson Fury fight Anthony Joshua. That didn't happen.
And I wasn't happy about it.
So when I heard news that Anthony Joshua might be stepping aside to allow Alexander Usyk to fight Tyson Fury, I thought to myself, you know what?
What?
If he's willing to do that, it's his right, and the silver lining is, at least we finally get to see the undisputed heavyweight title fight. Let Anthony Joshua face the winner, or have Anthony Joshua face Dillian Whyte, and let the winner of that fight, the winner of that rematch, let them fight the winner of Usyk versus Fury.
I was actually okay with it.
I would have been comfortable in either event. If Anthony Joshua were willing to stand down and let that fight go through, I would have been okay with it. I wouldn't have criticized him for it. But if he is so exercising his right to a second fight, to a rematch with Usyk, I'm okay with that as well.
It's a win-win from where I'm sitting.
It's fine by me, though. Anthony Joshua himself has taken it upon himself to dispel these widespread rumors and all of this speculation that seems to have all come from Gareth Davies and an article that he wrote, citing what can only be described as misinformation. According to Anthony Joshua, he hasn't signed any step-aside agreement, he's not on the verge of signing one, and until it comes from him, don't believe everything you read.
My gut tells me that there's gonna be a second fight.
If you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do. I believe that Anthony Joshua will in fact fight Alexander Usyk for a second time. I don't believe for a second that Tyson Fury versus Dillian Whyte will materialize. I'd sooner expect Tyson Fury to fight Francis Ngannou in a crossover boxing versus MMA match that'd make a lot of money here stateside, by the way, and that's why I'd expect him to do it.
Even if he has to drop the green belt.
I'd sooner expect Tyson Fury to fight Francis Ngannou than lock horns with Dillian Whyte, and he seems to be expressing more enthusiasm towards that fight than boxing his domestic rival.
I didn't get swept up in all the rumors.
Because behind these sensationalist headlines and clickbait, the actual stories are often more mundane.
Usually that's the case.